Welcome to a special episode of AI Talks. We talk exclusively to an IBM panel about the changing landscape of the automotive industry and how supply chain has been affected, not just by COVID-19, but through the impact of digital transformation up and down the ecosystem. My name is Kylie Jones, and I'm pleased to introduce our panel, Brett Hillhouse, Jay Black and David Hogg from our worldwide and European automotive business. Brett, will you go first and just say a little bit about your background?
Sure. So Brett Hillhouse, I'm in IBM's AI applications organization, and I'm responsible for our automotive business globally, background in supply chain, manufacturing, as well as product engineering.
Jay, can you go next?
Sure. My name is Jay Black. I am the worldwide sales leader for our supply chain products. I've been in the industry with order management for 20 years, doing implementations across multiple types of verticals. So happy to be here.
Great. And David Hogg?
Yeah, sure, Kylie. I'm David Hogg. I'm the Sterling supply chain sales leader for EMEA. I've been in the supply chain arena for over 20 years.
Thank you, David. Brett, can I ask you about the macro forces hitting the industry and what you've actually seen as a positive sign of recovery or otherwise?
Yeah, so it's like where to start. There's all sorts of things going on. One of them is that the industry is going through quite the inflection point of moving away from internal combustion engine and very quickly moving on to sustainable vehicles, especially battery electric vehicles. At the same time, we're having all sorts of supply chain disruptions. These are caused by all sorts of different forces, some of them raw material shortages. We've all heard about the chip shortages. We certainly have seen just transportation being disrupted and being able to actually shut down plants due to lack of supply of natural rubber, for instance. So all sorts of things have been popping up, and a lot of it is just about the instability of the supply chain. I think nothing has brought it home more in the last year than having to shut down factory after factory for having, supply chain issues.
David, over to you now. The automotive industry, like many others, is going through a VUCA time where volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity are contributing to the market forces Brett is talking about. What's your point of view?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you a kind of European perspective, and I see it close up. So, just to expand on Brett's comments, we're seeing it on a day-by-day basis right now and linked to shortage of semiconductor devices, chips. And when you get under the covers of that, you find that, they're exposed in a couple of directions. One is automotive, relatively speaking, is a small part of the semiconductor market. They don't have the strength of pull on some of the semiconductor suppliers as other industries have, like organizations providing devices for 5G and for home office equipment, which has been obviously peak in demand over the last 12 months. And I'll just expand a little bit further onto some other European issues closer to home. We've had something called Brexit happening recently, which has stood up a new border again, effectively causing slowdown across borders. And of course, because we are 57 countries in Europe, each country has its own COVID regulations. So transportation requirements, things like expanded COVID testing and general slowdown.
Jay, what about the US? Are you seeing similar things as suggested by David?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of adding on to what Brett mentioned with the disruption, the supply chain, it's changing the behaviors of a lot of manufacturers, not just automotive, but a lot of them, because they kind of work off a typical just-in-time type process where they rely on a predictable supply chain where they can just order something and have it in the next day for a production run. And now they have to move to more of a model where they keep a supply locally and work off a safety stock. So it's changing behavior, how they manage their inventory. The other thing that's been really hot in the automotive, not just automotive, but also across manufacturing, is because retail has done such a tremendous job of providing for automotive spare parts, all aftermarket parts, to be more responsive to customer needs, both on the retail and customer side, because they're asking the questions, why is it so easy for me to order stuff on Amazon and other retailers?
I want to hit on that a little bit, Jay, because I think you're spot on. There's also a change in the auto manufacturers on how they want to work and interact with their clients, with their customers, the actual end users of the vehicles, which they have been usually one step removed from. And that is really starting to change. And they're looking at multiple different models of how they're going to share the automotive stock between dealers. When you start going to battery electric, and those batteries, they don't want to have storage at every dealership. So even new vehicles, they want to have some sort of a shared stock in between the dealerships. So they're looking at staging materials in different ways than they've ever done before. And I think that's also looking at, are there multiple levels of how they want to supply to dealers, to retailers, and even, direct through Amazon or other online avenues to, get to their end users. And they all have their own aftermarket brands and their own aftermarket things that they do.
David here, if I could just chip in with a couple of additional thoughts, an opportunity to launch some new vehicles that were basically made to order, configurable. To your point, Brett, they would postpone the manufacturing of certain key subassemblies and then almost at the last minute join them together for the client in terms of how the client wanted it, in terms of, the entertainment packs or the color or the colorways on the trim around the car, et cetera, et cetera. So that intimacy with the customer was something they then pushed online. So the end consumer like you and me could then buy our car directly from the manufacturer, not through a dealer. So that's kind of like an interesting new model. And we've seen that coming up with some of the disruptors in the market who are providing electric cars right now. And a lot of these traditional car makers are jumping on that agenda, making sure that they can make it very clear to not only themselves, the consumers and their supply base, that they are moving rapidly towards a new type of vehicle, electric vehicles and so on. And the demand in the market is changing. Just another little data point, cities like Paris, London, some of the larger cities around Europe are announcing to drivers, you're going to be penalized if you're going to carry on driving your diesel car through this town. You're going to be penalized if you park up your petrol car in a certain part of the city. So I read yesterday in the paper that some of these large SUV vehicles that are diesel engined are being sold by London residents to folks out in the rural communities. It's just shifting the demand profile. So all of that stuff is all happening all at the same time. So no wonder these automotive guys have got a real big headache on their hands, not just supply chain, but up and down demand and supply.
One thing to add to that, so in the US, we had one colleague of mine told a story of how they tried to order a bumper. I guess his son wrecked a pickup truck, so he had to order a bumper. It took 6 months to get the bumper because it was just hard to find. Navigating through all different dealers, retailers, or working with the automotive company themselves to get that part. And that's the kind of things that these automotive companies are trying to fix, kind of have a single view of inventory. So, and be able to provide, and it doesn't matter what the channel is that you get it from, just provide the most efficient and most convenient way for a consumer to kind of find where they can get that part from and meet their needs, which would be, date needed and those kind of items.
Absolutely. I mean, I can say for myself that, I've tried to order parts and I find out that the part for my vehicle, I'm not allowed to order it because my VIN number doesn't show that it supported it. Now, that was a mistake in their ERP system. And it's something that's just interesting that we're seeing globally, this move from the manufacturers, the OEMs and the tier ones, that they need a more flexible ordering system. They can't keep going off of what they've been doing in the past. And Jay, I know you've been doing this, directly with some of our biggest clients in this space. So can you talk a little bit more about, the differences perhaps between, what we're seeing in a modern order management system on, being able to be more flexible, being able to prioritize certain customers over others or certain dealerships over others? What all are you seeing as far as what, these OEMs and tier ones are looking for?
Yeah, so ERPs were designed to be kind of work off a pretty predictable model and work off more of a static kind of back office model, which for many, many parts of the business is terrific. What's been happening is, based on some of the stuff I mentioned before, where, there's more B2B commerce coming up, there's more online ordering coming up, more consumer-based ordering, even retail-based ordering can be a little unpredictable. And then all the supply chain stuff we talked about. An ERP really isn't designed to handle those types of use cases. More flexibility is needed, more agility is needed, more scalability is needed, because when you're on a e-commerce site hammering the back end inventory system for inventory checks constantly, and it could be up to millions of hits an hour. And ERPs just aren't designed for that. There needs to be a more flexible system in the background to handle multiple inventory checks, multiple types of order flows, monitoring of orders, more flexible sourcing rules on what's the best way to allocate an order to a customer, using a large network, which could include dealers, warehouses, manufacturing plants, retailers for that matter. That's just not an ERP's footprint. And that's where a more modern order management system is needed in that kind of case.
Jay is making an interesting point about the traditional position of ERP systems as a solution for complex order management scenarios. So I wanted to ask you, David, for your thoughts.
I think with the ERP systems that are very single enterprise centric, it just doesn't cope with the extended ecosystem of supply chain, both up and down the supply chain that we have these days. We've seen progressively over the years that what used to be in the domain of the original equipment manufacturer has been, offloaded to key tier 1 providers, and then again tier 2, tier 3 suppliers as well beyond that. So I've seen continuous requirement for extended, if you like, end-to-end supply chain, things like control towers, things like inventory control towers on the one hand, to let you understand where inventory is. So in the aftermarket case, Brett, when you're hunting for that spare part, if the organization can extend out to their wider ecosystem to shine the light on all the inventory stockpile in the extended ecosystem of agents, retailers, service organizations, wholesalers, that provides a much, much better service to the end consumer like you. And then looking up the supply chain on the inbound side, I'll just give you an illustration of the type of stuff that's been doing. We at Sterling, we have IBM Sterling, we have inventory control towers, and we also have expert business partners. And in the case in France, we have a large-scale consulting organization called Sopra Steria, who are very keen on the automotive industry, and they've built an extension to our control tower to have what they call a risk management inbound supply chain control tower. And what that does is look at all of the inbound inventory flows and use AI to spot anomalies in the information that's coming towards it in terms of, okay, there's a delayed shipment. What can that mean to my production schedule? What will that mean to my expected delivery in, critical parts on Friday, Saturday this coming week, and flag that up so that then there's time to make some adjustments and do some expediting or make some production adjustments. So that supply chain control tower risk management profile, really innovative use of AI, plus the extended inventory visibility capability we can provide across an extended ecosystem.
Actually, one other technology I'll add to the picture as well, David, is blockchain is becoming more prevalent. Being able to track the usage from a serial numbers perspective of parts and lot numbers to keep better track of where they are in the supply chain, recalls, things like that is something that I could see becoming more prevalent in the automotive industry as well. So it can be kind of an underlying technology that sits on top of the transaction system to keep track of where parts were sold to, so returns against them. It can keep better visibility to where all the parts are and recalls as well.
That's a really, really good point, actually, because the, let's say, transaction-based systems that allow organizations to collaborate with each other very much dependent upon old-fashioned classic EDI. It does a fantastic job, of course. So, an original equipment manufacturer sending out a schedule, production schedule through a standard EDI format, received a schedule into the supplier organization, they acknowledge it, they send out an advanced shipping notice via EDI, and then eventually, of course, there's a receipt acknowledgement, there's a generation of an invoice, generation of a payment, all those classic EDI messages, right? But doesn't go anywhere near the type of information that would be captured through blockchain platform that you mentioned, Jay, that gets into the deeper stuff of harvesting a whole raft of additional information around the provenance of the original, let's say, even the material and the metallurgy of something that then is produced into some part of an axle or some part of a drive train that, could end up in potentially some litigation case if there's a problem down the track and and somebody wants to take the organization to court, they've got that blockchain detailed information, supply chain flow, which can help make it more transparent and more accessible to all. So I think that blockchain agenda is really going to increase in the coming years. And now we've got the technology to deal with it in terms of the volume of data and also the cloud-based technology to consume and process that data. So yeah, good point, Jay.
And I think there's two elements here that are starting to drive this. One of them is certainly the area of provenance, from making sure it's not coming from, an illegal market, right, for raw goods even. But also there's a whole cybersecurity push that is extremely important right now. And so understanding even where these chips and the software are coming from is a whole other area that they're starting to explore more and more blockchain usage. So provenance not only of material goods, but also of intellectual goods such as software.
One other thing I'll add as well is going back to the flexibility is a lot of these companies are looking for more options on how they can fulfill an order. So it's not even just ship from a warehouse to a customer, ship from a retailer to a customer, or pickup or whatever it might be. But I'm seeing a lot of needs for drop shipping. So there could be an OEM that could drop ship to a customer or some scenario like that. It could be transfers from one warehouse to a retailer, or transfer to a dealer and then picking up. So what happens in that case is an order requires more orders to fulfill one transaction. And it's about keeping that story together in case someone needs to kind of track where the order is. There's multiple movements that could be happening to fulfill that order. Again, it goes back to the flexibility of an order management system to make sure that you can support all those different types of scenarios. And it gives these automotive companies more options to do the different fulfillment types that they want to accomplish.
One question I have is, why IBM? David, can you go first?
So I think organizations keep coming back to IBM probably for three things in my estimation. One is that we have a very clear and defined security base. So to Brett's point, everything that needs to be done in this particular domain has to be robust, secure, reliable, and repeatable. Secondly, we can scale. We have the ability to go in any direction you like in terms of volume of information, the geographic coverage that we have, the scalability that we have with our ecosystems of business partners to help develop and deliver solutions reliably so that you can rely upon that, you can depend upon that. And thirdly, I think in this current climate as well, and we've had an excellent track record in it, is innovation and the ability that IBM has with its muscle and strength on an R&D agenda to help drive new technology at speed and adoption of this technology at speed, which is what's required as we've just learned about the automotive industry going through all sorts of states of change at this particular moment in time.
Jay, do you have anything to add on that?
I mean, for one, we have one of the most mature order management systems in the market today that was designed to handle the kind of flexibility and complexity that an automotive network needs to solve. We're already doing it today in so many other markets. And as we're seeing with automotive really coming to light in terms of needing to really modernize their infrastructure, the order management system is well designed to handle these types of scenarios. And on top of some of the other products we talked about with blockchain and with the control tower and with AI, I mean, we're bringing all these products together to have one solution that can really make things appealing for automotive and take them into the next level.
And just to further that point, why would a client not build their own OMS system? Why IBM in that case?
Well, it comes down to, first of all, it's a lot of work. But secondly, I always go back to core competency. What is the core competency of a company? Or do they want to build a system and manage it themselves and have to have a team that handles that? Or do they want a system that can be supported by another company, help them out, but also gives them the extensibility to build functionality on top of it and still stay within the framework of the product? And that's the nice thing that we offer, is a tool that gives them world-class functionality that an order management system provides, but also a platform to allow them to extend it and build on top of it. So from my perspective, it's the best of both worlds for a company to have that kind of platform.
So you obviously all know the automotive industry really well, but when we think about this industry, what have they stopped doing and what have they started doing? And what could they do better?
Yeah, so I think when you have a more modern system, one of the things that it stops you from doing is manual work. It stops you from having to handle orders, go into the system and do it manually. That's what I see a lot, especially in ERPs, when it comes to these types of scenarios is, with all these orders coming through, there's a lot of hand-holding because the ERPs don't support some of the more complex sourcing methods or allocation methods, so they have to go and push them through themselves. So more modern order management systems allow the system to manage the business rules and not have the client have to do it. So that takes the manual work away and allows them to now only have to touch the 2 to 5% orders that have issues that come up, like a back order, like a credit issue, like a fraud issue, maybe whatever they might be. And that's what the systems are designed to do: push this orders through automatically and only raise the issues when there's an order that's stuck for some business reason.
I'll give some thoughts on what I've seen about organizations in the automotive industry stopping doing things, starting other things, and then could do better in other areas. So I won't mention the company name, but I think it does represent what's generally occurring. I've witnessed that they've stopped doing what I would call speculative projects. There have been in the recent past literally hundreds of disconnected projects, all investigating, in some cases, some harebrained ideas about how they might take their business forward, teaming up and doing joint ventures in certain parts of the world to land in a new market without really having a clear strategy of how to follow up and win the day, as it were. So I think they've stopped doing a lot of those speculative projects. And I think the last 12 months has been an accelerant on that. It's been a bit of a wake-up call for the automotive industry, COVID and everything else. So stopped doing the speculative projects, started being much more focused on activities supporting the better strategy for the organization. So a lot of these automotive organizations have restated or more clearly stated their forward strategy towards different energy propulsion units for the transport sector itself. So getting into very much the green agenda, sustainability agenda, getting away from fossil fuels, thinking very much about their carbon footprint, and looking at projects that are or activities that really focus on supporting that agenda, generally speaking. And then thirdly, where could they do things better? And of course, I have one foot in the IT camp as well, and there's a couple of things I see. One is to be much more agile in the way that IT works in support of the business. So it has been rather slow moving in some cases, rather anchored and tied to some of these monolithic, slow dinosaur type ERP type projects, but have to get much more agile to take care of the business needs, which are multivariant and multi-directional these days. So agile IT. A quick thought about supply chain, particularly supply chain planning. We talked about supply chain execution quite a bit in the dialogue so far, but supply chain planning, it's been something that's kind of been working for many, many years in a certain way. You have a certain 6 monthly, 13-week rolling average, monthly planning cycle. It doesn't really get much more refined than that. But now they've got to be much more agile with the volatility that they see. So demand sensing, and then having much more increased cadence on supply chain planning to take care of things like volatility in demand, volatility in supply, and that whole supply chain planning piece, I think, demands rework and reassessment, and they could do better in that area.
I really like both of what you guys brought up. I'm going to hit a little bit more on the agile piece, just based upon the changes going on in the industry. There's a lot of new suppliers that they're having to establish relationships with as they move to, sustainable vehicles and battery electric technology. Not the same players. In some cases it is, but there's a lot of new ones they're having to bring in. A lot of these newer players are used to a more agile, consumer-oriented kind of buyer, and having a more agile and more complete process, beyond just a basic EDI technologies. Really being able to be agile and present yourself as a modern manufacturer, not some, old co that it may not be as interesting or as able for a new supplier to really invest their time in, because they've got to choose who they're going to be working with as well. There aren't that many, battery companies out there. There aren't that many of these new technology companies that everybody's trying to jump on immediately. So there's a little bit here even of competition between the OEMs of presenting themselves as the right player in the market, to their suppliers. And that's a little bit of a backwards, way of looking at things that they're not used to with their traditional supply chain. But they've got to be presenting themselves as a modern company with the modern systems and all the agility and, transformation that comes with that agility is really important here.
What an informative 20 minutes of sharing thoughts on how the automotive industry is tackling supply chain bumps in the road. Brett, David, Jay, a huge thank you for joining me today on AI Talks podcast. And to the listener, I hope you enjoyed the talk. Have a good day.